Good afternoon, and welcome to Ask the Experts. I'm Samantha Pelham, a Media Relations Specialist at Ohio University, and your moderator for today's conversation. Today, I am speaking to three wonderful experts whose area of expertise all resides in one of my favorite things, food, among other subjects that they're also experts in. But today, we're talking about food safety and sustainability around the holidays, as well as talking about access to food. So joining me is Steve Scanlan, Professor of Sociology, Director of Graduate Studies for Sociology MA program, and Director of Studies for the HTC Environmental Studies program in the College of Arts and Sciences, Michele Morrone, Professor in the College of Health Sciences and Professions, and Thom Stevenson, Assistant Professor of Instruction in the Patton College of Education. So welcome to you all, and thank you so much for taking time out of your extremely busy schedules, I'm sure, as we're nearing the end of the semester and Thanksgiving breaks coming up, just to sit here and talk with me today about something that I think is both really relevant as we approach the holidays, which can be, an extremely wasteful time of the year when it comes to food, and is also something that is important to the community and several others across the nation and globe when it comes to struggle with access to food. Like I've said, food is a big part of my holiday experience, sitting around the table and sharing it with my family and friends. I always look forward to all the specialties that are being made for the holidays, but that's not always the case for some. And I often think about the amount of waste that my family alone produces during the holidays of food we just don't touch and we throw away. And so I am really excited to have this conversation with you all today and learn a little bit about how we can be more safe, more sustainable, and then issues regarding access to food, especially this time of the year. But before we get started, if we could talk with you all and have you each introduce yourself and your expertise in your field, I think that'd be a great way to start off. So Steve, how about you? Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Great, thanks, Samantha. And I'm excited to be here as well. This is always an important time of year, as you noted, to be discussing these issues, and we're certainly, I think, more in tune with our consumption and those who don't have at this time. So I appreciate the timing and both the opportunity. As Samantha said, my name is Steve Scanlan. I'm in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and within the department, I teach a number of classes on social inequality, each of which I bring food and food insecurity, food justice, those types of questions into the classroom context. So whether it's my sociology poverty class or environmental sociology class, social change class, I try to incorporate that. And my teaching connects closely with my research. Most of my research over time has been on the issue of hunger and global food insecurity, and it's shifted more into the kind of the environmental connections to that. So it's a notion of what are the ecological considerations in addition to the inequality, the access questions, and so forth. And that fits in with the larger explorations I do on the environment and society.
Great, thank you so much. And we're so lucky and fortunate to have you here and have your expertise in today's conversation. Michele, how about you? Do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michele Morrone, and I'm a professor of environmental health science in the College of Health Sciences and Professions. Environmental health science is in the field of public health. And because of that, our main focus is on prevention rather than treatment. And food safety is one really important component of environmental health because there are many things that we can all do to prevent ourselves and our families from getting sick, and especially at this time of the year with all the different dishes and ways that food is prepared. I also have an interest and have done quite a bit of research in Appalachia and health disparities in the region. I think my colleagues are going to be able to talk more about security and sustainability, but I am really today going to focus on the safety issues and just helping anyone who needs some help to understand how to prevent illness at this time of year related to what you're eating and drinking.
Great. Thank you so much, Michele. And yeah, having your expertise in this area of food safety is going to be very helpful for, those of us who are preparing it, those of us who are eating it. And hopefully we'll get into discussions of what happens when you're preparing it for others or donating food? What is the safety regulations behind that, especially during such a giving time of the year? So really looking forward to hearing from both of you. And last but certainly not least, Thom, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Well, absolutely. My name is Thom Stevenson, and I'm a faculty member in the Patton College of Education, and my area of focus is restaurant, hotel, and tourism. And so our area of focus, what we really are encouraged to do is make every single dollar we can make out of every single experience when you're eating in restaurants. And so we love to give you what we want to give you in order to make as much dollar as possible. And then, other people want to give you what you should have. And so, but the challenge becomes food waste many times in our industry. And so we know that food waste is one of the biggest parts of food insecurity. 30 to 40% of all the food that is sold is wasted. To give you an idea, that would feed about 2 billion people. So in our industry, food waste is a number that we need to pay attention to. And so just last year, I was in Washington, D.C. Presenting around the National School Lunch Program. And so there's many opportunities to look at from farm to fork, many places where we could do a better job of ensuring that people have access to healthy food, reducing waste as it relates to fruits and vegetables. So my area of expertise teaches people how to cook in hopes that they will use those cooking practices, especially during the holiday time, to make healthier food to help, make sure that they live a healthier, longer life overall. So I'm glad to be here today. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And I'm hoping to learn something too. I am a horrendous cook. So if I can learn anything from each of you today and maybe take something away from how to create more sustainable and nutritious food without wasting it, because I know I unfortunately, have wasted food and do on a consistent basis, which is not great at all. So hopefully I can take something away from today's conversation as much as our viewers can as well. So thank you all again so much for being here and for having this conversation. For our viewers, if you have any questions for our experts on this topic, please drop those questions in the comments section of the live stream, or feel free to direct message those questions to the Ohio University social media channels. We will do our absolute best to get to as many of your questions during today's live stream as possible. But without further ado, I say let's go ahead and get our conversation started. So to kind of just start off on things and to give people an understanding of the different topics that we're talking about today involving food, I would like each of you to just kind of talk about the general idea of what food insecurity is, what food safety means, and then food sustainability and waste. So Steve, we'll start with you, but can you just kind of give us general information about what food insecurity is and what that looks like? Oh, I think you're muted.
My promise of getting that out of the way, I just lied. So anyway, but for those interested, yeah, there are numerous places to find, definitions and clarifications and numbers and things like that that clarify what food security is, what food insecurity is, what its various forms are, and so forth. And I typically my typical starting point is either the U.S. Department of Agriculture or more globally, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, World Health Organization, World Food Program, and so forth. I'll tell you what food insecurity is by giving you a food security definition, because it's its opposite essentially, and a common definition. And actually, in all these agencies, kind of build on each other and share these ideas. But it's essentially when all people at all times have access, and keyword being access here, to sufficient, safe, healthy, nutritious food that enables them to live the life they want to live. So whether they're working inside or outside the home, whether they're a student in college or first grade, whatever you need to do to live an active and healthy life, the food you consume should be able to provide that. And I mentioned the emphasis on access, and that's not only physical access, but also economic access, cultural access, food that meets your dietary needs, but also your preferences. A lot of times, food that is available, say at a food pantry if we need assistance, or food that's available in the grocery store, might not be entirely culturally relevant to us. And so we should have some empowerment and choice over the food we consume, in addition to what it is. And the last element of this, and is that the food we consume, it's more than just consumption, right? It's more than just food that we have access to. It has to be nutritious, as I mentioned, and as importantly, or on that regard, it has to serve our bodies in the way that our body needs to process calories and nutrients in a balanced diet and so forth. So food insecurity is the opposite of food security, and it has multiple components that we can further elaborate and clarify, because it does go in a number of different directions.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, I just, really want to be able to highlight what each of these topics that we're talking about surrounding food today means. And so I think you really just did a great job of giving those who might not know what it is an overview. And I love how you included the fact that it's both economic too. It's not just physical. It's can you afford it, and cultural too. There is a lot of different parts to that I feel like, myself included, don't always think about. So thank you for giving us that kind of general overview. I know there's so much more that could be added. So going along, Michele, kind of talking about food safety, can you tell us why it is important to assure that our food is safe, and especially for ourselves, but in this time of year when we're making it for others?
Yeah, I think I would just like to add, build on what Steve just said. Food security is just in my mind, very simplistically, both quantity and quality of food. You have to have both, right? And food safety really focuses in on the quality of the food. And there's lots of things that can make food unsafe. And it can start from the seed that you plant to grow your food. That seed can be contaminated with a pathogen then that grows into the seed sprout, or grows into the tomato, or grows into anything you might eat, or grows into the food that is provided for the animals that we eat. So the food safety really starts from the very, very beginning of the food processing, process, processing food supply. And what I think it's important, so I don't want to lose the sight that it's really, really broad, but at this time of year, specifically, I think it's really important also to talk about kind of the micro level food safety, and that is really what you are doing in your own kitchens with your own families, to prepare food, to store food, to donate food, because the last thing you want to do is ruin your volunteer, your donation mentality, or ruin your family's get together, any of the cultural experiences you have as a family, by making people sick. So hopefully we'll get it as we start, the discussion keeps rolling. We'll talk about some specific things to think about as you're preparing food, either for yourself or your family or for others.
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm really interested to get more into that and hear later in our discussion about how you can do that, both in terms of if you're preparing it for yourself and family or for others as donation. And then again, last but certainly not least, Thom, we'll throw it over to you to kind of talk a little bit about, what it means to take food waste and be sustainable with it, or to look at food waste, especially around the holidays, and utilize cooking nutritious meals from what you have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I'll just give you an example. So this next week, I think there'll be 4 different Thanksgiving kind of events that I'll be part of. We'll be making, a little less than 100 meals for students who can't go home for Thanksgiving on Wednesday on campus. This Saturday I'll be cooking with 15 kids that are in Linden, which are in Columbus, which are kind of in a low income, older neighborhood. And we'll be working with kids that are 8th, 9th, and 10th graders. Last year I was working with kids that were 3, 4, and 5 years old to make food in the kitchen. I don't think there's any time that's too young to really teach kids about food and its importance and the role they'll play. From ages 2 to 3 is when kids determine what their comfort food is. So if they determine that their comfort food is a healthy food option, that's a really good time for us to teach good practices. I will tell you that I see students sometimes come in the classroom and their hands are shaking because they don't want to make food wrong, or they don't want to make it bad, or they don't want to waste food, because most of them are all civic minded in nature. And so So what we want to do from the culinary side, which is where I do a lot of cooking around the intro to food production and food and culture, is to make sure that they understand that, in the kitchen's a good place to practice, but to do it safely, like my colleague who was just before was talking about. And there's all kinds of little things that you can do during this time to make it really viable. So an example, just one to start with, but see, all that stuff that we throw away, like the stems of the parsley that we throw away and some of the peels that we throw away, the tops that are of strawberries, all that kind of thing has a lot of nutritional value or add flavor to it as long as it's washed and maintained and refrigerated and all those other things. There's a great opportunity to introduce a lot of flavor without adding a lot of extra salt or sugar or all those things, that have some negative outcomes to us. So I'm excited to talk about more what we can do about food, but that's just a little tidbit to start with.
Great. Thank you all again, just giving that general overview of where your expertise lies and how it's connected is really great to kind of get this conversation started. And so kind of the first area that I want to lean into is before we can talk about food safety and before we can talk about, preparing it and how to utilize kind of the waste in the kitchen is that access point that Steve brought up earlier. So what are some of the barriers to food access that people in our local community and beyond face, not only, this time of the year of the holidays and Thanksgiving, but throughout the whole year?
I'm happy to chime in unless one of my colleagues would prefer to do so. I mean, certainly access is going to come on many levels. I think most importantly is the economic dynamic of it. We're hearing, of course, and continue to hear a lot about inflation and the price of the typical breadbasket. I'm sure I can guarantee we'll probably hear how much the typical Thanksgiving dinner will cost this year relative to last year. And when you have folks who are middle class or working poor or anybody for that matter who has a certain amount of money they can spend in their food budget, any impact is gonna be important. But that's especially the case with people at the lower strata of the income level. But it's not just economic. Certainly there are discriminatory factors, race and gender elements to this, cultural elements, and also spatial inequality types of issues. I'm sure we're all familiar with the notion of food deserts, or at least have heard the term food deserts, and basically referring to areas that just don't have easy access to healthy, nutritious, affordable food. Something that we would find, say, in a typical kind of grocery store that has a fresh meat or fresh produce or frozen food or dairy section. And so those are widely prevalent. And to emphasize kind of the other access barriers, say some of the racial barriers, some folks will actually use the term food apartheid instead of food desert, meaning that it's part of a structured system of inequality where people are disempowered and aren't part of the traditional food system or aren't included in the way that most of us think about that. But other things like transportation, whether you don't have a car or access to public transportation, certainly may limit what you have access to in your daily grocery shopping or at this time of year during the holiday season. There are others, but I want to defer to my colleagues as well to see some additional things.
Yes, so I'll build on that a little bit and bring the public health angle to food insecurity. And that is, obesity is a serious public health issue. And it is not just the result of individual behaviors. Some of the most food insecure places in the country also have the highest obesity rates. And that is because these communities don't have access to nutritious food, and their economic situation is such that it's much in their minds and in their abilities, it's much better for their families to buy a lot of low quality, not nutritious food than to pay for a bag of apples, for example. So there's that's been documented, the connection between food insecurity and obesity and all the other structural elements in terms of, getting to food, getting to a farmer's market, getting to a grocery store, those types of things too. So food insecurity is really an underlying cause of a really important public health issue.
Yeah, Thom, you have anything you want to add? Or
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to talk about dovetails directly into what I just heard. And so, if you want to talk a little bit like the farmers market example. So surveys have been done that once people leave farmers markets, they know enough to know what to do with for one day's meals. They can buy some stuff, but because it doesn't have a label or because it doesn't have a recipe or because it's something they've not cooked before, when they walk away from that farmer's market, what is a Friday night with my friends cooking a meal, all together becomes a one night experience rather than the rest of the week experience. And so, if you look at studies that talk about what we can do a better job to help reduce food insecurity, a lot of it is around access and education. We really need to teach people what to do with the food items when they have them, what they can do with the wasteful items that they may think that, they've never eaten before. Just another great example is to make little smoothie bags. So whatever you have left over, you can put that item, you can cook it, quick chill it, put it back in the freezer bag and put it in there. If you looked at my freezer downstairs, there's probably 20 little bags in there and they don't stay in there forever. Every week I pull out what's left over, make it into a smoothie, make it into a soup, because you'll ask people and they'll say, okay, what do I do with that last 2 pieces of celery? Or what do I do with that quarter bag of carrot? Or what do I do with the 3 apples that are part of that bag that I don't know what to do with all the rest of it? So the more we can educate people about how they can maybe meal prep on Sunday, which is a great thing to do with Thanksgiving, is turn it into little meal preps to make a quesadilla with the leftover turkey, to make a soup with the leftover. The more we can teach and educate them about what they can do with those items and use the old victory garden model, which was happened after World War I, which is share it with your neighbors safely, as long as it stayed out of the temperature danger zone, which is 40 to 140, and no more than 2 hours on the counter and no more than 3 to 4 days in the fridge, then we've got a better chance of educating people. So this type of year, food is, people are very giving, and empathy is a huge part of dealing with food insecurity. We have to take it upon ourselves to learn what's happening with the people in our neighborhood.
And I want to make sure we don't at least bring this up today, especially presuming that many of the people who are listening now or may listen, look at the video later, are in Athens County, and the fact that we have, by many measures, one of the best farmers markets in the region, if not in the country. We have the 30-mile meal. We've got a great, vibrant local food scene, but we also, depending on the year, have the highest level of food security of all the 88 counties in the state. So, what you're seeing in the city of Athens is really not what's going on outside of the city of Athens.
Yeah, can I just jump in there for a second?
Yes, please.
So that area that's the area that surrounds Patton College, for instance, that neighborhood that's right around the region, 43% food insecure. So even with a very strong food system, and even with people who are highly educated in the community about how to make food, like Casa, and the list goes on, and Chef Alfonso was at Hocking, and local farming and all that stuff, it's still a really challenging problem, because at the end of the day, so there was a study that just came out, and the study says that at the end of the day, when we help subsidize people's incomes, for instance, people that are on the lower economic scale, the study says that, most of them are around, some of them end up with about $12,000, a year sometimes to work with. That gives them $8 a day, $8 a day to buy food with. So if we're looking at, the sheer amount of money it takes to feed an individual on a daily basis, and we don't talk about feeding people, in the restaurant industry, we talk about serving people, because we're all part of a family of nature, but we have a lot of work to do in that area. It is a very different system in Athens than other areas, than in Linden. Just yesterday, I saw hundreds of Thanksgiving bags being lined up, from one side of Columbus to the other. Cars were lined up to hopefully have a Thanksgiving meal. And so, but I bet if you ask a lot of the families, they would know how to make a handful of dishes. But, we have to reintroduce cooking to people, and farmers markets are a great way to do that.
Great, thank you. Anything else that you would like to add to this portion of the conversation?
Well, let's not forget that college students are also part of a group of food insecure people, and I think if there are students that again may be listening now or may listen later, um, there is a food bank in Baker Center that is available to students, and either if you need it or if you want to donate, think about that, because there is research emerging that food college students are a good percentage are food insecure, and think about how that affects your daily ability to study and to go to class and and just to get through the day.
Yeah, and we will definitely, following this conversation, we can post the links to all of these resources for the community members, for students, anyone who is in need of these resources in the comments section, so they're readily available. But they're also on the Ohio University website for those of you who are interested and to learn more or in need of those resources. So thank you all. This is already off to a great conversation, but we got a question actually related to this idea of access and food safety and preparation. Do you typically find, or is it normal that when there's limited access to food, people find it harder to keep food safe when preparing it and storing it, because sometimes they might not have those resources to keep it safer, to make the preparation safe, if that makes sense?
Well, I'll leave it to my
Go ahead,
colleague.
Thom.
It's funny because I'm not a big social media fan, quite honestly, but there's a TikTok video where there's a lady who's going and she's been talking about the need for centralized refrigeration. Because if you had centralized refrigeration, that's a great place for people to kind of store food that they traditionally wouldn't get access to. And so, I know that we do a lot of work here in Columbus, which is around the CRC, which is the Clintonville Resource Center. And many of the people, when I talk to them, we do a hot meal while they're picking up their box that they get monthly, that they have to sign up for. And many of them will say, I'm not even sure what I would do with this food item because I've been housing insecure for, or I'm critically, housing insecure, or I'm couch surfing is another example. Even some of our students do that. And so where does the food get stored? And so what I try to do is teach them what they can do with shelf stable food. This is a big conversation that I have with a lot of people who donate food. I say to them, we did a survey of all of our students, and many of them who are international students during COVID, were food insecure during that because they can't work off campus. So, and many of them said the things that they were looking for were things like sardines and canned meats that were culturally relevant to them, but also had high protein to them. And so I'm always cognizant of things that have a lot of salt and cognizant of things, that can create a greater amount of, challenges. Just an example of that is like there was a study that was done last year at Tufts and Brigham Young's Women Hospital. And what they did was they provided a 30% subsidy for fruits and vegetables, a 30% subsidy for healthy food. And they did an extrapolation and they found that $3.97 billion would be saved in healthcare over the life of these individuals. And then they also looked at there was a 1.93 million people that have reduction in cardiovascular disease. So what that means is that we know healthy food pays off in the long run. We know that people, once we can get them in the kitchen, you should see a 6th grader in there making enchiladas from scratch or making a turkey dinner from scratch, because we're experiential learners in nature. So we just kind of connect the dots. We have to connect this access and equity and culturally relevant foods and do it in a healthy way and teach them what to do with it. And, little by little, we'll rake up enough leaves where everybody will want to jump in. But I'll tell you, when you give people a situation where it's $8 at the end of the day to try to figure out how to buy food for it, it's really tough. And so we have to solve the refrigeration. We have to solve the transportation and logistics challenge, and we have to solve the waste issue.
Yeah, thank you. Michele, do you have something you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to say, the most important thing that anyone can do to keep their food safe is to manage the connection between time and temperature. And so the amount of time that your food is in the danger zone, and that comes from the food code, the U.S. food code, and the danger zone has been revised in the last food code, and it's from 41 degrees to 135 degrees. So minimizing the amount of time that your food stays, at 70 degrees room temperature. So being able to manage temperature and knowing how hot you have to reheat, and if you have the equipment needed to reheat your food to a safe temperature. One of the most important things that you need to have in your house is a thermometer, right? A thermometer. And so this is going to keep your food safe, but if you don't have a house or you don't have access to appropriate equipment, managing the time and temperature in that relationship is going to be all the more challenging.
I love how you also just had that on hand to explain, but yeah, that definitely makes sense. And just as a follow-up to that, can you talk about what some of those illnesses are if you don't, have your food properly refrigerated, or if it's been sitting out too long at a different temperature?
All right, so the most common illnesses or pathogens that you're likely to be exposed to at this time of year is going to be salmonella, which is related to poultry. It can be in any food. Any pathogen can be in any food, but salmonella is one to be aware of. It's one of the most common foodborne diseases, and I always ask when I'm talking about foodborne illness, put yourself in this situation. Say you've been invited to your best friend's house for Thanksgiving dinner, okay? And the turkey comes out and they cut the turkey and it looks pink and looks like not maybe cooked the whole way. What do you do as an individual in that situation? Do you just eat it anyway because you don't want to hurt your friend's feelings? Do you say something? Do you whip out your thermometer? I mean, these are, this decision that you make, whether or not to eat what you think is undercooked turkey, could ruin your week or could ruin everybody's week, right? Salmonella is the most likely culprit. It's not going to really, it could be very mild, but again, we have to think of very susceptible populations here. We have to think of immunocompromised people. We have to think of the very young, and we have to think of the very old, and the elderly population. And those people are going to likely to suffer more harm from being exposed to these pathogens. And then the second one to think about is viruses. So there's a whole group of viruses called noroviruses, which actually used to be called Norwalk viruses because they were first discovered in Norwalk, Ohio. Yes, there you go. That's where they were first discovered. And now there's a whole group of these noroviruses, and they get into the food because somebody who touched your food did not wash their hands. And 99% of the time, if you are infected with a virus, it's because there has been bare hand contact with food, and whoever handled that food did not wash their hands. So and these again could be mild, but we also have to think about immunocompromised people here. So those are the two things, and managing the time and temperature of your food is going to help minimize the spread of those pathogens.
Great, thank you. Steve or Thom, you have anything to add to that?
I was wanting to add maybe even kind of a bigger picture kind of take on this too, is we have to think of the food system and the way food is produced, say in an industrial agriculture system. So when we have concentrated animal feed operations, right? We have chickens on top of chickens laying eggs. Those types of conditions are a foundation for a lot of the health problems that may result in some of these instances that Michele is talking about. And so we really have to look not just what goes on in the kitchen. We have to look at, of course, at what goes on in the restaurants, but what goes on in the whole food chain, from production to distribution to processing to marketing and retail and selling. Because again, a lot of what our choices, a lot of what we have to choose is beyond our control in terms of what happened before it got to our plates. And so food safety is across the whole system and not just, again, what happens in our kitchen.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Steve. And I want to just build on what Thom said earlier about waste, because in a lot of ways, food safety leads to more food waste. Because, there's the saying, when in doubt, throw it out. So, I mean, there's this weird connection there between safety and waste.
Yeah, I guess I would add that, so in our industry, there's an unwritten rule that we're going to make and provide food safely for people. So we have to be, we're providing, the restaurant industry in nature is providing, meals for everyone. And so when you think about what may make me feel sick from something that has been made, it may not make the other person sick. Because I'll give you an example. So I used to have a family member, and she would make this incredible salad, but she would make it and then she would want to leave it on the counter all day long so that as everybody, would watch the games and do whatever, they would go back and snack on it, and so. And I always would cringe at that moment because I thought, oh my gosh, and I would kind of do ways to influence up. I'm like, oh, don't you think maybe we could put that in the fridge, and then it would be nice and chilled. Everybody would want it when they want it. And so the thing is that, what might be okay for your family and what you've had because of what's been done in that household, would be very different for somebody new who comes to the household. And so you have to be really cognizant of the fact. And so there's some basic thoughts, nothing really honestly should sit out on the counter more than 2 hours. It should. Anything past that time frame, it needs to be back in refrigeration. And just because it goes in refrigeration doesn't mean it's going to be good in that entire time in refrigeration. So things 3 to 4 days, not everything, but most things by that point it just loses its flavor, loses its texture, loses all that. So garbage in, garbage out. So if we don't use healthy food items that's been washed and cleaned, and that means things like on the skins of outside, even the tops of cans, we don't think about it. Like when we're making food, I often tell students in the kitchen, I'm like, did you wash the top of the cans? And they'll look at me and they're like, what? Wash the top of the cans? And I'm like, did you not go to the grocery store and see everybody who's picking it up and doing all kinds of things with it? So there's ways to, you can do a lot of things to help ensure that people will come away with that food experience as healthy and safe as possible, because like my colleague shared before, you would not want to do all that good work and then have people walk out of that experience and not feel well, or and oftentimes when you're distributing food, at a food pantry or in a blessing box that happens outside of a lot of churches now, it's really crucial that when we're giving food to other people that we're protecting it from point A to point B. And that's why in the catering industry, for instance, we have much stricter guidelines to make sure that it stays in refrigeration, to make sure that it's stored safely, because heat, steam, all that stuff is rice, for instance, is, a great way to contract food poisoning because it is the perfect mixture of heat and steam and all those other kind of things to make that happen. So.
Thom, I'm interested in, you were talking about, what the food lines that you've been working on for donations.
Yeah.
What types of controls are there during the donations to ensure that the turkeys and other things are maintaining safe temperatures? Is that possible?
Yeah, we don't distribute. So turkeys were taken out of a refrigerated truck, and this situation came, I think, from Gordon Food Service. And CareSource was the provider. So CareSource was there, and they were putting what was a frozen turkey that came directly out of a reefer truck, that's refrigeration and frozen together. They were carried directly out of that. They were put in a refrigerated bag, which is like a zip bag, and then they were put beside what was dry ingredients, which was sweet potatoes and that type of thing. And so this was a package that people could go home and produce. Now when we make food, when we make it for the CRC, we make sloppy joes and some of those other things, and we have thermometers on hand. We have a triple washing sink back in the back. We have sanitizer. We have gloves. Everybody goes through a wellness check before they distribute the food. All those things to make sure that and CRC has refrigeration directly behind us. And so, and the food, we're only serving it in an hour's time frame. And then we have a heated unit out there to make sure that everything is temperature maintained, because we need to follow what is the ServSafe guidelines, which is the guidelines that the Restaurant Association uses, I think, which is the guidelines that you were referring to. And so, there are other scenarios where, you make food and you want to donate it out. That's a whole different thing. So we use hot boxes that are Cambro hot boxes. They maintain heat at a certain temperature. The heat's rechecked. Everything that's reheated is reheated to 165 degrees, which is the requirement. So, I mean, there's a lot of law that's in place. And that's why when you're the catering side of the business, which is a class I teach, and that's my 10 years in the industry, was in that part of the business. When you're taking food from point A to point B, you have to be extra careful to ensure that happens safely. That's why the food truck business right now is one that our industry is watching a lot, because that's why many small catering operations are required to operate out of a central kitchen, like AceNet. The Athens area has one in Athens. They also have an AceNet, which is in Nelsonville. And so those two locations have a central kitchen so that people who are making food meet what is the license requirement for the state of Ohio and the health code license.
That's very interesting. We're actually getting some questions in for you all as well, going back a little bit to when we were talking about food insecurity around the holidays and in the context of being on campus, and you brought up Cat's Cupboard and donating. So we have a question from an alum named Amal, who actually says that they took a class with Dr. Scanlan, Sociology of Poverty, so a former student of yours, Steve. So I'm going to ask their question, but also ask another question that we received that are very similar in terms of, I think, what you can talk about. So the question is, how should we think about addressing food insecurity during the holidays in the context of the college student population, particularly when campus resources can be inaccessible? And then the other question is asking, in terms of students from preschool up to college students, when campuses are closed or school's not in session, how can they get these resources when they are inaccessible if they're relying on a meal from, their school, whether it is a college student or a fourth grader? Sorry, that was a lot to unpack there.
No, these are definitely important questions. I mean, it's no different than grade school kids or kids who rely on meals from school in the summertime and the programs that are in place to take care of those things. And I think we need to think about it in one way, in a sense that this time of year, at least people, I think, feel more generous. They're much more cognizant of the issues, right? They are aware, and we get the media stories, and we have conversations like this. And so I think people are more generous, and that certainly helps with organizations like Cat's Cupboard in Baker, or local food agencies, Athens Food Pantry, or donations to community food initiatives and things of that nature. But I think the key, kind of going back to that access, though, is we have to think about the bigger access questions and not just about emergency situations, right? We have to kind of alter the way we think about it so that we don't have to rely on the emergency situation as much as just kind of maintain regular access and whatnot. So for students, the typical poor college student, as the phrase goes, I mean, obviously they're spending a lot of money for tuition, and we often assume that, just because you're a college student, you have the privileges that are coming with that. So we have to be cognizant of the money they do have to spend on food. We have to be cognizant of the nutritional value of the food they are able to afford. So, so back to Tom's point about $8 a day, that's an average that I'm guessing a lot of college students don't even get up to. And so these conversations that you have with students, or just seeing them in class and being tired or lethargic, or hey, are you feeling okay, kinds of things, I think we always have to be cognizant year round, and especially come January, right, after the generosity slows down and so forth. But on a larger scale, I mean, it really does come back to supporting a food system that people generally have access to, in terms of the costs of food and the nutritious value of what's available in their communities and so forth. And that's a tall order, right? That's not something I wish we could wave a magic wand, right, and fix that overnight. But I think we always have to think about systemic solutions as opposed to just the Band-Aid emergency types of solutions that I think is kind of the treading water kind of approach to this.
Oh my gosh. So I will tell you, just last week, this is a conversation I've had with 3 people. I've heard a lady outside of the CRC say to me, I've not had meat in 3 weeks. Can I have a sloppy Joe? She's not a student, but she's in her early 30s and she's a single mom and has a child, and so that's conversation number 1. Conversation number 2, I've talked to students who have said it was either buy books or buy food at this stage of the game. And so I opted to buy books because my goal is that when I can, learn and hopefully I can earn a better wage going forward. So we do try to Band-Aid it. That's why our free meal that happens on Wednesday when campuses, a lot of places are closed down on Thursday. So our thought is you come in on Wednesday and have a meal, and by the way, we'll send you home with a to-go meal or to-go meals, so that you at least have access to a meal, on the next day. And I will tell you that so Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, food and culture students and intro to food production students and restaurant operations students will all be working together in the kitchen. And I love to see it. I love to see it so much because they have so much fun. And then they start talking with each other about how they normally eat with their hands if they're from one culture, or they don't eat with their hands, and what people say to them when they eat with their hands, and what people's faces are when they eat with their hands, some groups. And so we get back to, Dr. Scanlan's conversation around cultural competency. And so there's so much tied to food. It's a necessary item. It's a Maslow's level need. It's a, but when the pandemic started and the news broke a story of a 7-year-old girl who was placing an alarm clock so that she could go get food for her and her for herself and her 5-year-old brother, everybody said, oh my gosh, we have a food insecurity problem in this country. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we've had it forever. We've had it for a long time. So what are we going to do to fix it? The systemic challenges are such that we are trying to do our best to create Band-Aids, but until we realize that everyone needs access to healthy food, that we do grow a lot of food, but we throw a lot of food away. Everybody needs to know what to do with that food, including students, and we cannot expect students to do their best. And all these studies have said that if you give students different food items for over a 30-day period, even the students that have the most challenges, the most learning difficulty, by the end of it, they do better. We should take a look at the Japanese model. The Japanese model where actually kids make food, their parents make it, they send them to it, they eat it in a classroom together, and then they talk about the cultural elements that are important. So I think every single student on campus should take a class to learn how to cook basic things. I think every single student should have access to that food. And I would guarantee, because research says it, that if they had access to it and they were eating it, they would do better in the classroom. They would be less disruptive at every age of the group, and they would be more supportive of one another from a cultural competency standpoint, which is what we're all trying to get to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Michele, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I was just sitting here thinking, back in the dark ages when I was an undergraduate student at Ohio State, and I lived through a very food insecure time as a student. And I imagine many of my colleagues have had those experiences. I mean, to the point where I think there were several weeks that all I really had was like a bag of onions. And I specifically remember like making onion rings and, making sauteed onions, do whatever I can to like stretch those onions out. So, I think that in many ways, if there are people that are, that are experiencing this now, to talk to faculty members or staff people or others that you trust in the community, because I think the majority of us have been there at one time and may be there again in the future. So there is quite a bit of empathy and compassion there.
Yeah, thank you. Just in general to the 3 of you for talking on this subject, because it is a really important subject. As we here work in higher education, and food insecurity is hitting all around the world, but we see it here on campus with students who might not have access to food or going home for the holidays and not have access. So I am really grateful that the three of you were able to talk on the subject and provide resources. And again, like Michele said, and I think I can say this for most of the university, if not all of it, if you're a student or just a person in general who is looking for help or is food insecure, reach out to your faculty members or staff or colleagues or anyone who can help you, put you in a place so that we can get you access to food. It's extremely important. And I, can only imagine how food impacts studying habits and education and focus. Like you said, Thom, it makes a whole lot of sense to me. So anything we can do to reduce those who have food insecurity, we are here to do. But I kind of want to go back to something else that you had said, Thom, about this cultural idea and cultural how food can help shape that. But Thanksgiving, like we said, is coming up, so we're having this conversation, and I say the holidays, but the holidays encapsulate so many different holidays for other cultures. So can you talk about how teaching communities about culturally significant foods is tied to, or that are tied to other cultures, can create sustainable change in the cycle of food insecurity? As we are approaching multiple different holidays for different cultures.
Yeah, so I would just give an example of rice, right? So in
Yeah.
most places in Southeast Asia, they would say, "Have you had rice today?" Or, and what they're really asking you is, "Have you eaten today?" And if you've eaten today, then that's a good place for you to be, right? That you're living that kind of life. And so I will tell you that, when I talked with state legislators about food shaming when I was in Washington, D.C., and I would say to them, I'm like, I can walk in the middle of any middle school right now and I can see some child who's eating their school lunch or eating a lunch out in front of a counselor's office because they're not comfortable eating in front of one another. And maybe it's because the food that was packed by the family at home, the one that they've always eaten. I mean, acculturation is something that's happening in this country all the time. And food practices are one of the last things that get taken away, and some cultures do a better job of holding on to them. And so there's something really powerful. If you were to come on Wednesday and you were to sit in the room, we'll have people from India and Pakistan and China, and they'll all be talking about this idea, of Thanksgiving. And depending upon who you talk to, I mean, the background of Thanksgiving has all kinds of, we don't really call it Thanksgiving, we call it home away from home. Because for us, that's really what it is. It's really an opportunity. Athens is your home away from home when you're going to school. And this gives you an opportunity to kind of learn about, part of what is the Thanksgiving Day experience, and to jump into what is the regional cuisine that can be part of that. Like we'll use local sweet potatoes and, a rural action, and Living Healthy Appalachians does a great job, in the Athens area of helping people with food systems. But my good gosh, we have so much work to do in that regard, because I don't want to see one more child suffer from food shaming because their cultural significant items are not understood by the other group. And I will tell you, my food and culture class, when students start to learn about how people eat with their hands and how that happens, their eyes open up in a really powerful way. And then that bridging happens. It's hard to be mean to people when you eat with them, and it's hard to yell at them with your mouth full. And the more we can do those kind of things to help people, the better off we can be, as a society in general.
Yeah. Michele, Steve, do you have anything to add to that?
Thank you. I mean, that was beautifully said.
Yeah, agreed. And I wanted to bring up. Oh, sorry, Steve. Did you have something to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to agree. And I love that notion of not calling it Thanksgiving, but yeah, home away from home is a wonderful way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I wanted to bring up this question and this topic too, because like I said, we talk about the holidays, talk about Thanksgiving, but that's not the reality. Not everyone celebrates Christmas or Hanukkah or the vast majority of other holidays that are celebrated within the next 3 months, really. And food is so tied to culture and so tied to these different holidays. Myself growing up with various different types of cultures with my family, I ate different foods for different holidays. And just the thought that there is food shaming happening is so disheartening. But this time of the year, especially if you're an international student who is, here in Athens, home away from home, you might have practices for your culture that you want to celebrate while you are here, but the fact that you are so inclusive of recognizing that not everyone practices the same holidays or shares the same food for those holidays or their culture, I think is really important to remember this time of the year, that not all of us are eating turkey, not all of us are having a Christmas Eve meal, or eating latkes, you know? So thank you for talking on that. So we are getting close to time, unfortunately. I feel like this conversation has been so quick, and I know that there's so much more that we could have talked about, both in terms of food safety and insecurity, and ways to be more sustainable and less wasteful. But I do want to leave these last 5 minutes of our conversation open so that the three of you have the floor to be able to, educate or inform us on anything that we have yet to talk about today. So if, feel free, any of you, to come on in and step in for any last comments that you really would like to say.
Well, I guess I could jump in first, and then so I guess I would just ask us to be mindful of what it took to grow the food, what it took to find the food, what it took to ship it there, what it took for us to make it, what it took for us to earn it, and who doesn't have access to it. And I would ask us to do that from the start of a recipe to the end of it. And I would ask us to involve other people in that process. And then I would ask us if we have food left over and we can do it safely, to share it with others. And I would ask us to ask the individuals that we're sharing with what it is that they really need and what they really want as a stakeholder, to make sure that we're not projecting what it is that we think they normally need on them. And I think we have a much better opportunity for people to live a healthier, longer life, and not just survive, but to thrive. And I think that simple things like making sure that all the herbs that the winter changed really quickly, and so take those and chop them all up and put them in ice cube trays with water and put them in your freezer. And then in January, pull one ice cube out and use that to make part of your stock with. I think there's all kinds of really interesting things that we can do, the smoothie bags and the meal prep and all that other stuff, because although I love the restaurant industry and I think it's the most amazing industry in the world, I think learning how to cook at home to wrap that experience around it is important too, because everything in moderation. And I appreciate everybody's attention to the great industry and the great work that people are doing around food.
Thanks, Thom. Steve or Michele, you want to add anything, last comments that you didn't get a chance that you'd like to say?
I can chime in, and then Michele, I'll be sure that you have some time as well. And I think kind of the bigger, and this connects with what Thom is saying too, but kind of the bigger picture dynamics of where our food comes from, but also the kind of the ecological, environmental, sustainability, climate impacts, right? I mean, obviously, food is a product of the environment, but also the environment is impacted by our food choices. And so the things that we eat certainly affects what others are able to eat in terms of the whole system, or what the environmental impacts are on our food choices. And that's something I think we should think about, because it definitely is an element of access. I mean, one thing we haven't said or emphasized, I think it's implied, is that, again, we produce more food than we need, right? It's just that we don't distribute it very well. But also in that process of producing those surpluses, we do a lot of damage to the environment. And so what we have to do is figure out a way to produce the food we need in a sustainable way without harming the planet, without destroying, land that is important, not just to agriculture, but for leisure, for human existence and those types of things. So definitely, waste is a part of that. It's not just that we waste food, but we also lost all the climate impacts, the energy impacts, the food miles, everything that goes into that. And so there's much bigger ramifications. And I love, Thom, I love your suggestions about, the smoothie bags and saving stuff for stock and things like that. But to that, I would add also composting. Composting is a very simple thing. You can do it in a flower pot or a small trash can. And I know space is an issue, right? And some apartment complexes, students have told me we're not allowed. But if you can do those things and recycle that wasted food back into a garden or a plant, that can help a lot as well.
And then I'll just real quickly, say that if you're sitting there thinking, well, I don't eat turkey or I don't eat meat, so I'm not going to get sick. Produce is a major cause of foodborne illness, and anything can make you sick. And just there's so many resources, and a really good place to start is foodsafety.gov. Foodsafety.gov, very good resources. If you don't know how long to thaw your turkey, or you don't know if I should wash my potatoes, make sure you educate yourself about safe handling of food so you don't make yourself another sick at this really, magical time of year.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for having this conversation and for taking time out to do it. I do think it's really important, and I know I've learned a lot and have new perspectives that I think I will bring into the kitchen and bring into just my everyday life, and I hope our viewers took that away as well. For our viewers, if you have any other questions that you'd like to ask these experts, please feel free to let us know, and we can reach out to them and get you connected and get you your answers. We'll also have this video living on Ohio University's social media channels. On our Ohio news site, we will also have the video embedded in a story, and I will include resources there to Cat's Cupboard information if you're food insecure, if you're looking for food, to the foodsafety.gov that you had mentioned, Michele, any other resources that we can help you, not just this time of year, but all throughout the year. So again, thank you so much, and I hope the three of you, as well as all of our viewers, have a wonderful holiday season, and keep in mind what all of these experts have said today. So thank you again, and have a wonderful weekend.
Take care.